So I put it on the agenda, and of course, with a huge majority, Palestine was admitted to UNESCO. And, the whole house started to dance and so on. And I said, sit down, because I haven't even finished, the proclamation. And of course, we were trying somehow to keep also the possibility to give the floor to everybody who wanted to say a few words. But outside Bonbon in Paris, on one of the entrances, I was waited by about 100 Arabs dancing, flowers, and so on. On the other side, by about 100 Orthodox Jews with sticks and everything. So, that's the president of the General Conference. And, your role is really to keep the legal framework, to give the chance to everybody to talk, to keep the climate as possible rational in the house. So I asked my driver, who worked for the French Secret Service, a guy from Algeria, I said, Ahmed, you have to take out in the boot in the car, because, whichever entrance I choose would be a very difficult task. But the story starts here. Then I got an invitation from Mark to the Institute for Culture Diplomacy. And of course, someone who has dedicated her life to culture diplomacy, just because I have believing in this concept for so long, I came. And that was the time when I was attacked and I was robbed back in Paris. And of course, this robbery and attack was the time when they took all my papers, all my notes, everything about the discussion, taking Palestine. And interestingly enough, after half a year, the French police told me this attack did not happen. So I'm just telling you, it will be part of my book, which I will write at some point. I don't know when. But anyway, what I'm just saying, if you are a diplomat, and me, we will talk about identity politics later. I'm a woman, so I'm a woman diplomat. You have great challenges in life, and it's always a great question how you can manage these challenges. But I think, as I'm going to speak about diplomacy, multilateral diplomacy, which is very much related to soft power diplomacy in terms of style and time-consuming, it is the really decision for diplomats, where to stand, how to stand, and how to think in long terms, or how to take decision for a short-term solution. Now, I'm saying a few words about the UN because everyone is speaking today about the UN. I mean, since we saw this unique situation that one of the members of the P5, meaning the permanent members in the Security Council, and as you know, the 5 PRs, the 5 permanent members, are supposed to sit in the Security Council with a veto right in order to protect peace in the world, right? That's the thing. That's why they have this bloody veto. That's why we can't move anywhere, because these 5 have the veto. So we can't do anything. So one of them decides to attack another country. So what does it say about the Security Council? What does it say about the United Nations? So where are we? I mean, what are the other countries are doing? En plus, it happens while there is a special session in the Security Council chaired by the Russian ambassador that the president attacks another country. So I think, obviously, there will be many politicians, historians, very clever professors discussing and analyzing this situation. Having said that, this is a situation which obviously involves our thoughts every day. I took a back step, so I left my foreign office last year after New York, and I'm mainly meeting these very interested and young and talented students from all over the world. I'm very happy that in Hungary we have now about 40,000 foreign students because we offer a very good scholarship for people coming there. And I'm teaching cultural diplomacy and multilateral diplomacy. And I'm saying that to you because the first question from them always is, okay, how do we reimagine the UN? What the UN should be really? So I would say the UN is really tested. I said that very first in one of my speeches when the pandemic broke out, that now is really the time when we can say the UN is tested, but because how the UN is going to react to the pandemic. But the UN has been constantly actually tested, as we know. So just that, I'm sure you all know that, but just to summarize, that in June 2045, delegates in San Francisco signed the United Nations Charter. And of course, in 2020, we were all planning the great celebration of the UN in New York and all over the world. So the year 2020 was supposed to be an outstanding year, because besides the 75th anniversary, we were planning also to celebrate this year the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. I'm sure you all know that. That was really the first meeting for women from all over the world, really to discuss women's rights. Also, we were supposed to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, which again is a milestone in the work of the UN, and in many hot places, war zones, or during peacekeeping processes, this agenda is used. For example, in Colombia, this is how they managed to put women to the table, but I will come back to that. And also, that was the 10th anniversary of UN Women, which is an organization within the United Nations dealing with the rights of women all over the world. I was, in 2019, one of the vice presidents, and in that capacity, I managed to travel and to meet and to see great challenges all over the world, which we probably don't even talk about. Anyway, the year of 2020 was supposed to be an opportunity to strengthen linkages between these themes and stepping up our efforts in implementing the unfulfilled promises, while the reform processes initiated by the Secretary General were chugging along relatively well. Global challenges, big power games, clear attempts to undermine the rule-based international order. Don't forget, it was just the COVID that time. Widespread trust deficit among the member states, and that was all in the forefront. And the implementation of the two current holy documents, you know, in the UN we call holy document, Paris Climate Accord and Agenda 2030, we knew already it was doubtful even before the outbreak. So we will see what will happen. Anyway, when the UN was established 75 years ago, the goal of the leaders of the world was to make sure that we use multilateralism to avoid the terrible consequences of not working together for a better future. But it was already Kofi Annan who said, we can no longer take it for granted that our multilateral institutions are strong enough to cope with all these challenges. The pandemic caught the United Nations at a pivotal time. Despite the overarching expertise and responsibilities of the UN and its agencies, despite the long-existing warnings, the full force and extent of the COVID-19 crisis and its far-reaching consequences took the United Nations, frankly, honestly, I have to tell you, and its leaders and the members, largely by surprise. And that was really a surprise for all of us, that it was taken by surprise. We were taken by surprise. So we are questioning, okay, what was done before? What about prevention? What about collecting data? What about doing the research? So we know, of course, that coronavirus doesn't need a visa. This was the time for fresh ideas and creativity in thinking about whether and how to reposition institutions of global governance, including the UN, to respond to sustainable transformation that are on the way across the international economy. And I remember, I'm sure you remember as well, Henry Kissinger then was talking about a new Marshall Plan to solve this problem. We organized a talk with Professor Joseph Nye, who of course is one of the great fathers of soft power diplomacy. And I remember actually, he said that there are not too many creative ideas out there. So although we should all recognize that good foreign policies are valued on motives, means, and consequences, and he hopes that we'll turn back to morals and reasoning in our international affairs. So morals and reasonings, what are very much missing in the arena. So we need the UN because we want to discuss. We need the UN because we believe we need to address and share and solve the problem together. We know that the UN framework is an important but far from perfect one, so we have to supplement it rather than blow it up. I said just a few minutes ago that multilateral diplomacy is very strongly related to soft power diplomacy, I believe. There was an American politician and Professor George Shultz who talked about multilateral diplomacy, and he considered multilateral diplomacy is like gardening. Because, you know, you start to spread the seed, and then you go to your garden, and it takes time, and you water a little bit, you look for the flower, and so on. And so you need to be very patient. I also believe with the soft power diplomacy, the case is very similar. I was brought up in communist Hungary when I was as young as you are now. It was communist Hungary. So for us, the hope was given by soft power, by culture diplomacy. And actually, the culture diplomacy was the format which was able to build the bridges between us and the rest of the world. So culture diplomacy gives a hope for long-time bridge building between peoples and nations and continents, obviously. So you need really patience and international institutions because gardening takes time, and the UN is for planting and seeding and trimming for long run rather than business deal bargaining. We all know that national answers are quicker. We recognize that during the pandemic. More dynamic countries have, first and foremost, to focus on their own health emergencies and saving the lives of the citizens of utmost importance for all the governments. So it is our priority to put healthcare response at the forefront of this crisis all over the world. And moreover, we know that national governments take into consideration that this crisis of the pandemic affected almost every aspect of human rights, so it is equally up to all relevant stakeholders to tackle socioeconomic consequences at the same time. As people turn to their governments for help and security, though, I recognize very often that many governments turn to the UN and other international organizations for help, information, knowledge, advice, and support. So here comes the UN responsibility as well. It is true that shifting geopolitical landscape and questions regarding the ongoing changes in the established multilateral order dominate the work of the UN, and multilateral order is under pressure from emerging and recurring challenges. We should fight to preserve the achievements, I believe, but we should accept the fact as well that all institutions need to adapt and evolve. Reforms are crucial. I started to talk to you about the Security Council and the 5 permanent members. While serving at the United Nations as an ambassador, I was part of a core group through which we were trying to pursue the members of the Security Council not to use their veto right if it is about a crime against humanity. And I remember it was the time when Samantha Power was the American ambassador, and Mr. Churkin was the Russian ambassador. And I went to talk to them and, diplomacy. And I said, you really have to consider that. France and England signed this kind of decision, what more than 130 countries so far signed in the UN. China didn't say a word. And the US said, well, if we wouldn't use our veto, we would just leave the UN. And Russia said, if we wouldn't use our veto, you could push the whole UN to Washington. So what I'm saying, this is nearly an impossible problem, how to solve what the P5 is supposed to do or is allowed to do, really, in a situation like what we are observing or we have just observed. I really believe that the solution is in the hand of the General Assembly, because as you know, in the General Assembly, every country has the same one vote, the right to vote. The same vote comes from each country, each member state, so at the moment 193. And I think history showed us the importance of the General Assembly. In 1956, I'm coming from Hungary when the Soviet tanks crashed the Hungarian Revolution. Obviously, the Hungarians then asked for help from the UN in New York. Of course, the UN didn't help. Hungarians were hoping to see the blue velvet people coming from the air, the sky. And of course, the Secretary General can't order anyone to go anywhere if the Security Council doesn't allow that. So obviously, that time, the Soviet Union and other countries who sat, like Yugoslavia, for example, at the Security Council, did not vote for that. The situation is very similar today. So this is really where we need all the ideas and movements how to use a more advanced and effective format to tackle these situations. And I argue that that is why we need to focus much more on preventive diplomacy. The constructed multilateral institutions are all just shiny shells, I would say, without the converging political will of the political leaders and the support of trust of our fellow citizens. If the UN wants to have the full support of the world, it has to change with life according to the demands. We need to be proactive, demonstrate our mutual values to and our trust in each other, and ensure our willingness to reform and burden sharing. Good governance, either within or out of the walls of the UN, is measured by the transparency of its institutions and processes. Only a complex approach allows to successfully combat radicalization and intolerance, break down stereotypes, build trust and mutual respect, and promote peaceful coexistence. This is what we all would like to see. I always emphasize the important role of women in this process, in the prevention and resolution of conflicts, peace negotiations, peace building, peacekeeping, humanitarian response, and in post-conflict constructions and reconstructions. The inclusion of women is crucial in achieving sustainable peace, and I believe that each century has its defining moral issues. If slavery was the towering moral issue of the 19th century, the fight against totalitarianism dominated the 20th century. The right of women and the struggle to uphold them in every corner of the world is the moral imperative, I believe, of the 21st century. In 2020, I thought that the future holds much uncertainty. The world was passing through a nerve-wracking period, and we would need global cooperation and collective response, I thought. We also needed to spread messages of hope, optimism, and solidarity, I thought, and had the ability to galvanize international consciousness and collective responsibility not only to fight the pandemic, but also to emerge stronger of the COVID area. And what happens? What happens? We are going back to our bad habits. Have we really not used it well? Probably not. I don't know what you think about that. I would like to reimagine a UN when preventive diplomacy has a much bigger emphasis and the role of women in diplomacy is strengthened. And I'm telling you why. It's not about identity politics, but I really believe if we don't have women at the tables where peace negotiations take place, there are a lot of issues which are forgotten. I've seen it, I experienced it. Probably, verbally, they even would say, yes, I know we will put this and, we will deal with that. But then they forget about it. For example, in Colombia, where we can speak about a good process and a successful process in terms of peace negotiations, it was very clear that women were invited to the table from both sides. And they were very, very strong, very vocal about the women issues, what women needed, how to treat women, how to treat the women, who suffered and so on. So all these issues were put into the text, in writing. And this is very, very important. I also set up, this is again a personal note, a movement. It's called Women for Diplomacy, just because I believe that that's a much better way to tackle problem, through diplomacy. And I really believe that women stand more for diplomacy than for shooting and finding really the hardcore power as a solution. In terms of preventive diplomacy, of course, in Ukraine, the road war, the road to war, what we've seen was paved by the failure of diplomacy. So after days of speculation about whether the Russian President Vladimir Putin had made the final decision to invade, events earlier in that week left little room for doubt. And as an emergency meeting, as I told you, in the United Nations Security Council was taking place in New York on that very Wednesday evening, Putin announced Russia's invasion. So there are various measures of preventive diplomacy which I believe could have been used and undertaken by the UN, which vary to the time of peace and crisis in different regions, of course. In peacetime, responses include confidence building, institutions building, early warning system building, preventive humanitarian aid. The resolution during peace works on building a relationship with the states for the future and have them in a confidence to resolve disputes in an effective manner. It also works before an actual conflict occurs. Therefore, it also works to create an environment of peace where conflicts can be avoided. So the crisis time responses include fact-finding, good offices, goodwill mission, crisis management, preventive deployment. This is all used by the UN. During the time of crisis, the main focus is to find the root cause of the issue and effective eradicate it and eventually mediate for resolution. It also focuses on curbing the crisis by providing any form of assistance, diplomatic or political, economic, humanitarian, or military in nature. I always say, if we talk about here very often soft power diplomacy, of course the UN is the place where is the so-called smart power used, because hard power and soft power is a combination in every sense of the work of the United Nations. We also know that elements of UN's role in preventive diplomacy are the special envoy, the special political mission, the peacekeeping operation, the regional offices, and the using mediation expertise. These elements work on various different levels in various countries. The UN also has a designated toolkit for prevention of conflict. It includes UN resident coordination. This is a modernized system, actually. The UN country teams. I know many of you are coming from countries where the UN has country teams. Electoral assistance, gender inclusion expertise, and the framework of the UN is designed to provide to the best suitable method to achieve global peace. So obviously there are successes, good examples, and bad examples. The UN has been successful in their approaches, for example, in preventive diplomacy in countries such as Burkina Faso or Colombia, Kyrgyzstan, Guyana, Liberia. But of course, the UN has failed to adequately provide resolution to various other countries and regions. Some of the examples of the failures in Rwanda and Yemen and Cambodia, Sudan or Iraq or Syria and Myanmar are in this line, of course. As I said, we have experienced that if we put women into these processes, then the results will be, you were, Prime Minister, talking about the importance of empathy. For many years, we were not even allowed to talk about empathy because, you know, this is something what is not strong enough. But actually, without that, how on earth you are going to make peace or you are going really to understand the other person? I remember the very first time in 2015 when I spoke at the Security Council. Before that, for a month, I went there to listen, and I realized that everyone just reads a statement and then goes away. And I was thinking, how on earth are they going to make peace? They don't even listen, not to have a dialogue with each other. So I remember I was talking about that if we don't understand each other, and for this understanding, we have to understand the cultures of the other people, because how on earth we want to make peace with someone whom we don't even understand. It was, of course, a very long journey for women in diplomacy, and I will say a few words about that, because probably you are not aware of that even today, it's not a very normal issue to see women as ambassadors or heads of missions. And as a Hungarian, I'm very happy to say that the very first woman ambassador, head of mission, was a Hungarian woman. It was in 1918. She was called Rózsa Schwimmer. She was a Hungarian pacifist, feminist, journalist, and women rights activist. And with the establishment of the first Hungarian Republic, she was sent to Switzerland to represent, as an ambassador, head of mission, to represent Hungary. But she was sent back by Switzerland very quickly, because in Switzerland at that time, they were still voting about whether women would have a voting right or not. And Switzerland believed that Hungary wanted to interfere into this process, that dared to send a woman ambassador. And actually in 2020, the Armenian Diana Akbar was sent as the first consul general from the Republic of Armenia to Japan. And only in 1943, the famous Soviet diplomat Alexandra Kolonai, who has been an influential figure in women in diplomacy, was the ambassador in Sweden of the Soviet Union. And only in 1949, the first US ambassador woman was sent to Denmark, Helen Eugene Moore Anderson. And I always want to just stop here for a moment, that in Britain, the very first woman diplomat joined the Foreign Office in 1947 There was a great documentary about her, Cicely Mayhew. And of course, that was the time when many articles were discussing that women are not capable for becoming a diplomat. And in Britain, for many years, women diplomats were not allowed to marry or have children. So they had to choose whether to become a diplomat or to be a mother and a wife. Only after 26 years, this very ban was lifted, actually, the so-called marriage bar. And only Edward Warburton, as the first British female ambassador, was appointed in 1976. So what I'm saying, it is a long and difficult process. It is not something what is even taken very naturally, even today in the world. But I must say, going back to Britain today, women ambassadors are running the most influential missions all over the world. So, we are getting there. I created a Circle of Women Ambassadors in the UN in 2015. And that time we were 37 PRs out of the 193. When I left in 2021, we were 51. So this number is going up and down. It is already a critical mass, but this is not what we could say that there is a parity between women and men in diplomacy. But also I would say that the Secretary General of the United Nations today is a feminist Secretary General. He himself says that because he managed to make gender equality in the senior management. Not only have we a Nigerian Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, but we have really half women and men in the positions of Undersecretary or Assistant Secretary General. Which, of course, doesn't mean that the UN as a system can show the world a real parity or gender equality, because I must say that it would take many, many decades to see as many women and men, as many men working in the United Nations. I would like to go back just to recognize the process. What is so important for everybody is that preventive diplomacy and the role of women in preventive diplomacy can bring results. But I always say that we are doing it and we have to do it together with men. And I'm also very happy, just two more footnotes about that we managed to have the first resolution of the General Assembly to create the International Day of Women in Diplomacy on June 24 every year. It just happened this year. Actually, it was presented by Maldives. Where is the Maldives gentleman? Yeah. And of course, a core group of ambassadors. And last year, UNESCO celebrated UNESCO established the very first International Day of Women in Multilateralism. So these are already two international days, and of course, these days are paying the respect to the crucial role of women in global governance since drafting and signing of the United Nations Charter in 1945. Historians remind us of several remarkable women without whom this groundbreaking charter would not have been as inclusive as we know it. And just, of course, remember Eleanor Roosevelt, who played an instrumental role in drafting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Since then, women have been joining more and more key positions in the UN organizations, and I would say very important on the field as well. Now, finally, I would like just to say, actually, is here someone from Jordan? Yeah. So the new UN Women head is from Jordan. She's my friend who was the Jordanian ambassador to the United Nations. So that's the very first time that we have an Arab woman running the UN Women. And Sima Bahous. Yeah. So that's really... Huh? Well, I don't know that. You know, I when I'm listening to you, it's like I find that everyone is actually Palestinian, because there is a story in Hungary, right? That wherever you go in the world, somehow you just meet Hungarians everywhere, because, you know, we have a very interesting story. We were occupied, we mingled, we welcomed, we influenced, you know, I mean, because where we have been coming from and where we are located. And there was a famous British-Hungarian writer, George Mikesh, who wrote this famous book, How to Be an Alien. And he said, well, you know, so after all, everybody is Hungarian. So, you know, so who knows, after we go back to our roots, we will find this out. But anyway, I think this is, again, something, a milestone, because whenever someone is put into a position like that, will not only represent the whole organization, but obviously the motives, the attitudes, the directions are influenced by her own background. So someone from the Arab region is very, very important. And I want to share with you the newest, oh God, we have lunchtime, right? Okay, so I just tell you rather where you can find it, because this really came out like yesterday or the day before yesterday, done by UN Women, and that's the Levers of Change, Gender Equality Attitudes study in 2022. It's on the internet. You can find it at the UN Women website. And this is really very interesting because gender equality is recognized, as you know. SDG 5 is part of the SDGs. We will talk about SDGs. So obviously we have been doing in the UN all these researches, and actually there are a lot of discriminatory and a lot of discriminatory social norms even today, according to this research. And the countries: Colombia, India, Japan, Kenya, Nigeria, the Philippines, Sweden, Turkey, UAE, United States, Austria, Brazil, Denmark, France, Mexico, Poland, Senegal, South Africa, Spain, and Vietnam have taken place in this research. So if you are interested in that, you can find it. And I just want to quote something, that among the 20 surveyed countries, despite areas of improvement and some promising indicators, the findings demonstrate that discriminatory social norms and attitudes continue to higher program. Despite progress, women continue to face multiple barriers to political leadership and decision-making, and as women continue to be underrepresented at all levels of decision-making worldwide, we see that the journey I was talking about is a long way to go. And what I was quite intrigued reading, and this is the last thing I want to share with you. It was the next generation of women are strong advocates for change, and that is why we need to have them more included in decision-making process, in diplomacy, in peace building, and in peace talks. I remember when I welcomed Mr. Ban Ki-moon as the president of UNESCO General Conference when he came, and he was talking about the importance of women taking part in the peacekeeping processes. Then I asked him, Excellency, where do you put these women? Because what he meant was they were taking the notes, sitting at the table. And of course, it's very, very rare that you see women running peace talks. And I would like to celebrate that with you at some point, if I'm invited back by Mark. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor.
Many thanks, Ambassador Bogyay, for sharing with us your first-hand experience with multilateral diplomacy within the United Nations system and UNESCO, and also for describing to us the role of women in preventive diplomacy. And as an Austrian, if I may just pay tribute here to the first woman who was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, Madame Bertha von Suttner, who was a citizen of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize even before the First World War. And now we have time for a few questions. I do not know.
I'm fine, thank you.
Let's
take maybe 2 or 3, and then over lunch we could continue.
Please, Prime Minister, yeah.
Prime Minister, we will have lunch together.
This topic is too important. Okay, so can you hear me? Or?
Or maybe stand up.
You can stand and we see you, we hear you.
Okay, I'm a staunch supporter of women in politics, in all walks of life. And I seem to recall when, in 2011, when I was minister in that cabinet, we were, first cabinet meeting, we were talking about the new electoral law at the time for parliament elections. And I was the only one that wanted a minimum percentage of women in the electoral law, 30%. Of course, their excuse is that it can be up to 50%, but we don't need to put it in the law, and at the end of the day, very few women are supported. So there are lots of surveys that show, as you alluded to, that women are more transparent, better managers, less corrupt in all walks of life. So, and women, if you look at some of the top universities, those that take distinction and high distinction are percentage-wise more than men. So it's only right to, I mean, men have failed so far at least. So I think we should give the opportunity for women, not just in preventative diplomacy and conflict resolution, but in all walks of life.
Of course.
I very much support that.
Thank you very much. I would like just to say that, bravo. I would like to say there is another movement, it's called He for She. You can all join. He for She meaning the he is believing in the she. So I'm a happy one because I had a father who was a he for she. I found a man and married him because he was a he for she. And I raised a son who is a he for she. So it is, of course, also the role of women, how we are raising our sons to become he for she. But we have to do this journey together with the he's that I wanted to say. Excellency.
My name is Peter Juveli. I'm an Albanian professor.
Professor.
Since you know very well United Nations, my question is related with the role and function of the United Nations and the organizations that are acting under its umbrella. After Second World War, the world continued with the Cold War. After that, a period of detente and some pacifism, some agreement between big countries. And now we are in the period that have too many wars, and in the part, we are, let's say, dangerous situation for any war, big war. My question is,
You mean the World War? Or what war? Because there are some wars going on, so which war are we talking about?
I get in mind.
Yeah, okay.
My question is, do you think that the system of United Nations and international organizations that acting under its umbrella need reformation because that all the situation changed, while the international organizations, part of which I know, don't change. And how to improve and to increase the effectiveness of the United Nations and its organizations? Do you think that need such reforming?
Professor, first of all, this is the $1 million question. You know, if anyone could answer it now, would be given all this money immediately. But I must say that, of course, the UN Charter was signed by about 51 countries. Today we are 193. The UN has seen, as you said, the whole process of the decolonization. That's why, for example, the trusteeship council doesn't really work anymore, but that time it was very important, obviously. So the world has changed and has been changing. I would not say that the UN hasn't changed. I think the UN is going through constant reform. I mean, frankly, if you go back to the documents, you just read the reform process of the Security Council, reform process of the General Assembly, reform process of the ECOSOC. There is always a reform process because the moment the UN was created, the reform process started immediately. I think the UN was able to give a lot of good answers, and the UN has been doing a great job on the field, and there are a lot of parts of the UN doing a very effective work. You know, what is not or very difficultly moving forward, that's the Security Council, because there are the 5 permanent members who have the veto right. And until any of them can use the veto right, there is no way that we can reform the Security Council. Having said that, I would like to tell you or share you the newest development. Because of the Ukrainian war and because what really happened in the Security Council and in the UN by a member, a permanent member, using the Security Council, because it is just a footnote again. If there is a topic related to you, you are not allowed to chair the Security Council. Having said that, I told you why Russia was attacking Ukraine. Russia was chairing the Security Council. So nothing was really acted according to the rules in a way. So now the General Assembly has organized itself much stronger, and at least there is now a new ruling that anyone who is using the veto in the Security Council has to come to the General Assembly, meaning to speak with all the 193 member states or in front of the 193 member states and explain why they are using or have used their veto right. It doesn't mean that they are not allowed to use the veto right, but at least, as you know, it is a, you know, if there is a big push on a country or on a person, it is much more difficult than, for example, just to use it. So that's why I said at the beginning that personally I believe that more power has to be given to the General Assembly, because that's the most democratic part of the United Nations, because everyone has the same right. Everyone has got one vote, and you can decide how you vote, or not you, I mean, it's all your government, of course, and the big powers influence everybody, we know that, but still, I mean, on the paper, everyone has got one right. So I don't believe that the UN looks today as it looked in 1945. Probably I would argue that the main ideas to protect peace, that would be the same as why it was set up. So that's why I say we can't just erase the United Nations, but if we want to have an organization fit for purpose, so fit for our world of today, then we somehow have to find diplomatically the ways how really not to depend on the veto rights of the P5. And I think this is really the $1 million question, how we can do that, because it is obviously an absolutely political question, and that's why I said that, for example, France and Britain already are coming with the flow in that sense, but neither the US or Russia is even wanting to hear about that, because for them this is security. They can use their veto right anytime. Having said that, for example, the way how we use or we choose the President of the General Assembly or the Secretary General, it has changed. I was, again, part of the core group, which was arguing that you can't just choose the Secretary General anymore behind the scene, because normally it was the Soviet Union or Russia and the US, and they decided who the next Secretary General would be. And during my tenure, we managed to, again, decide in the General Assembly, and today, since Guterres, they have to give they have to take part in a town hall, they have to explain what they want to do, they have to be able to answer questions, so it would be very difficult to choose someone who is not prepared for the task, if I want to use a nice word. So there are steps which I think are part of the reform processes. And every year, every General Assembly sets up the core group of the Security Council reform and the General Assembly reform. But the most difficult thing is the Security Council reform. If you have any ideas what to do without the UN, that would be a big question. I don't know. I don't think so we can just get rid of the UN. There were a lot of movements to get rid of the UN. I'm sure you all know that. But I don't think so this is the solution. Rather, to use the pressure coming from the countries, from the governments, into the sort of the centrum, so that we could really rather create a reformed version of the United Nations.
So we have three more. Yeah, three more. The gentleman from Iraq.
Iraq. Very nice to see you, sir. Could I have a little water? Is it possible? I don't know. Someone?
My question is that the United Nations has the right to interfere in the political world in the country, because we see the representative of the United Nations in Iraq is interfere in the political affair and always meet with the leader of a political party. Is this true? Is this from the core of her work? And by the way, he's a woman. He's in plus one. That's always meet with the leader of parties. Is that true?
Well, if I may say so, sir, the UN per se cannot do anything. Only, you know what I mean? I mean, in the Charter, that's why I said the example, for example, in 1956 in Hungary. The UN couldn't do anything because the Security Council did not vote on the UN to interfere. So if there is a decision taken within the United Nations on something, and this is either a majority, a 50-plus majority, or a two-third majority, or whatever. It depends on the voting. This is really what decides what the UN can do. The UN is not something standing on its own. The UN is ruled by the member states. So if the member states are not giving the power to the UN, for example, to interfere or to send missions or to send peacekeeping or run peacekeeping operations or run the offices, they couldn't do it. But this is only one side, because the UN also has to work with the member states. What is in stake? So obviously the UN couldn't do anything in Iraq without discussing it with the Iraqi government. I mean, so this is a very fine way of diplomacy, what the UN can do. Probably what the UN does the best is a lot of humanitarian work, because interestingly enough, this is where the UN can do the best and the most in the world, in many places. But politically, it is a diplomatic job coming from the decision of the member states in the organization, and also discussing everything with the government itself in the field. Otherwise, that would be difficult, Although, having said that, we've seen big powers to intervene without being given a green light by the Security Council. And this you know very well.
Yeah. I'm reminded that we have exhausted our time. That
And also the speaker.
two more questions. If you can ask those in a telegraphic style, and if the answers can be in a telegraphic style, then I think the ICD will accept, because otherwise I'm told we have to conclude now. The lady was first, and then
Would you take a picture? It's for my social media. Yeah, I never got it from Mark. No, I know that. So just give it to me. It takes hours. Yeah, okay.
I've been told to be telegraphic, so I'll go straight.
Where are you from, ma'am?
I am Ambassador Chin.
Ah, nice to meet you.
My question is, while our leaders
Thank you.
continue to meet in Brussels, New York, and so on, and hold talks, women and children are dying in numbers in Ukraine and other parts of the world. What, in your opinion, can the women, the UN women, what can be done to put a stop, to bring about a stop to this war, rather than this
Thank you.
preaching and talking that has been going on, and this keep on going on and on? What can the women do? Thank you.
Excellency, the UN Women, as part of the United Nations, has been actually working very strongly on that. As I said, a lot of humanitarian work is done. A lot of political work is done at the background. Because of the approaches by the UN Women, focusing on women and girls on the field, obviously. But to solve a war, to turn a war into a peace, this is not something what any part of the United Nations could do. What I'm saying, the UN Women could not make peace, because at this point, this peace is, the role of UN in this point is only to really to talk to all the players. This is at the moment not that, they can help with the grain and so on, but at the moment we are over the moment that it is prevention. This is not prevention anymore. This is the war. It's again another situation. So what the UN Women will be able to do, it is the post-conflict situation, but we are not there. I really personally would like to see the solution, how we can make peace, or we can see the peace, because if there is no peace, the only way is to welcome the refugees and give them all the support, whatever they need. But at the moment, they can't even go into the territory.
And the last question from Serbia, please.
Thank you.
Professor.
Singapore diplomat who served as his country's ambassador to the UN published a book several years ago suggesting a reform of the UN Security Council in the following manner. Britain and France should step out in order to be replaced, Britain by India and France by the European Union. I would very much like to hear your opinion.
All right. Okay. So that should be the last, right? Yes. With the Security Council. I would like to say just a few words about the reform process of the Security Council. There are different groups in the United Nations arguing for different things. There is a group of consensus. There is the group of 5, Brazil, South Africa, mainly the BRICS, right? Germany. I mean, there are countries who believe that they should be, by now, permanent members of the Security Council. It is quite difficult to imagine that India would be allowed to sit there because Pakistan would never allow it. It's quite difficult to imagine that Germany would sit there because Italy, Spain, I'm just saying now, the group of consensus, they would never allow it. So I don't think the solution is to put new permanent members. There was one moment in the history of the UN, during Kofi Annan, he was so clever, he managed to secure 2 places for Africa. Because actually this is really what's missing, really, you know, the representation of Africa. But Africa could not agree. The African countries couldn't agree. Which 2 countries would that be? So this moment gone, although the framework was there, which I think was politically and diplomatically really remarkable. So what probably the closest we have come to the reform looks like that there would be more countries sitting there for a longer term, meaning, you know, the most biggest, more influential, important, whatever countries, they would be given more time to act there. And also, what I believed always, that the ones who are sitting in the Security Council should be also representing not only their country, but the region. That's why I know this book, and that's why the Singaporean ambassador was talking rather regional organizations like representing other countries. That doesn't work because regional organizations or the EU is not member of the European Union. They are, you know, they have a special working relationship. They have some rights, but they have no voting rights. I mean, the EU is not member of the European Union. Only nation states, only the members are member countries are members of the United Nations. So I think we should have probably a little bit of a bigger Security Council. And what we should work, for example, also in Eastern Europe, we are from Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe should be also more represented, because what is the situation? The situation is what we see at the UN now with the regional group. It is the post-Soviet bloc, Yugoslavia and the Soviet Union, but they are now all separate countries. And that's the problem. They are, of course, not represented by the Soviet Union anymore, as they used to be, or Yugoslavia. All the other countries were represented by Yugoslavia. So obviously, in Eastern Europe, we also would like to see 1 more seat, because at the moment there is only 1 seat for Eastern Europe. And I very much would argue that Africa would need at least 2 more seats, because this is really that's one of the biggest mistakes. And obviously, this is a long discussion whether, and many argue that the most influential or the more influential countries should be given this right. But when it started that Brazil and Germany and Japan and South Africa, you remember that was the whole movement more than 20 years ago started. That time Brazil was more influential. Nowadays they wouldn't argue that Brazil should sit there permanently anymore. So I don't think so the solution is to create more permanent members. I think we should really create a more representative way of the countries being or sitting in the Security Council. And of course, it's all political. So it is all on the member states what they would allow or they would be able to pursue by.
So with that, we have to conclude our session, and we thank again Ambassador Bogyay.
Thank you very much. Women for diplomacy, ladies. Yes. Thank you.